possibly the largest, most comprehensive study debunking critical claims of the Book of Mormon has just been published. And I think it's going to change the way you view the Book of Mormon as an ancient text. Because ever since the 1800s, people have been claiming that the Book of Mormon contains historical inaccuracies. Things like horses in the Americas where there shouldn't have been, or steel, barley, cement. So one researcher set out to document every single one of these critical claims since 1830, compare it to what we know about archaeology now. And the result is staggering. Welcome to Informed Saints, where we study hard and we always bring our receipts. I'm Jasmine, this is Neil and Steven, and today we're going to be talking about this new groundbreaking research that is blowing away centuries of criticisms on the Book of Mormon, and it is all about anachronisms. So, Neil, what is an anachronism?
So anachronism is just this big fancy word that basically means something that is in the wrong time and the wrong place, right? So really obvious, like sort of dead-on examples where like everyone knows that would be anachronistic are like George Washington in an automobile. Anachronism, right? You know those like really cool Murica shirts, or maybe you don't think they're really cool. I don't know. Where you have like one of the founding fathers like with a blazing machine gun and a jet or whatever, right? Like those are anachronistic T-shirts, and nobody cares because they're it's fun, a T-shirt, right? They're just fun.
Donald Trump riding a velociraptor.
Yeah, like just like
that's
things
my
like that.
favorite one.
So those are when you take things from different time periods, different places that don't go together, and you put them together, it becomes anachronistic, right? And so, like I said, for like a fun T-shirt, nobody cares. For something that claims to be historical,
or so like if there was a document from George Washington describing a velociraptor and machine gun,
right,
then we would question if that was a legitimate document.
The authenticity of that document would be suspect, to say the least, right? So yeah, when you're talking about something that's purporting to be historical or is presented as historical, anachronisms are kind of seen as a problem and can be fatal to the authenticity of that text, right? And so that's why critics like to bring up and compile these big long lists of anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, because they believe, and understandably so, I mean, to be fair, they believe that these are telltale signs that the Book of Mormon is basically a forgery, an 1830s forgery, right? So that's kind of what they are and why critics talk about them.
Okay. And this study is like over 200 pages long. It's this book here. It was published by the Interpreter Foundation, and this is like essentially a volume of their journal, but it is massive as far as how detailed and comprehensive it documents.
And it comes with pictures.
Yeah, every single
pictures and charts.
Anachronism. And obviously this is such a huge topic. We're not going to cover all of it in this episode, but we may cover some of these in different episodes. Like I know horses is a big one people have problems with.
Steel swords.
Yeah,
we're gonna steel sword, man.
We'll cover some individual ones or maybe some group ones like weapons together or something like that in separate episodes. We're just going to kind of talk about like the big picture that this study presents here today. So,
and I don't want to go too far before actually like showing what these results are, and then let's like talk about how cool they are and what it actually means for the Book of Mormon, because it kind of blew me away when I first looked at this. So the researcher here is Matt Roper. Matt Roper is a scholar of the Book of Mormon, and he documented every single criticism of the Book of Mormon. I don't remember exactly how many there were.
Well, what he did is he went through over 1,000 publications, critical publications on the Book of Mormon, and documented like I think it's 226. If I'm remembering
226
anachronisms, claimed anachronisms in those 1,000 publications, and he specifically there are some other anachronisms out there that can't necessarily be tested or verified through archaeology, and so he specifically focused in on ones that could be tested with archaeological data, right? And so that's what that's the end list he came up with was 226 of them. And he puts up these really helpful charts. He starts with, we've got a chart here that shows the state of the evidence upon Joseph's martyrdom, basically. Between 1830 and 1844, there were only 102 of the claimed anachronisms were made in publications dated between that time period. And 93 of them, indeed, appeared to be legitimate anachronisms at that point.
The Book of Mormon probably looked pretty silly back then to a lot of people.
It did. And
we have this great account from David Whitmer. He's being interviewed. I forget the guy's name, but we can throw him up here on the screen. And David Whitmer tells the guy, when we were instructed to bear testimony of the Book of Mormon, we were worried about it because at the time, we thought this book would look silly to people. It's historical claims about people dwelling in large cities. But according to David Whitmer's account, they were assured by the Lord that the time would come when the Book of Mormon would be vindicated, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So even contemporaries
Yeah.
had this idea of like, it's a little sus, as the kids would say, right?
I mean, this red list here, I mean, I can't read the text. 'cause
Big,
it's so
scary
small.
red list.
But it's,
Look at that.
You know, things like steel. It's things like...
Look at fortifications, armies, cities,
horses, right?
Horses.
Goats. I mean, all kinds of animals. Yeah. Large armies.
The name
millions,
Nephi, the name Moroni.
millions of deaths. Yeah. Various names. All kinds of things that people just thought seemed ridiculous, right?
In ancient America.
And granted, you know, at that point in time, they did look ridiculous. There are a few things here that have been confirmed by 1844, largely thanks to John Lloyd Stevens going down to Mesoamerica and kind of being the first one to really introduce Central American archaeology.
What year was that?
1842.
Okay.
Well, that's when it was published.
And so that really was like the first time ancient American civilizations were kind of coming to the forefront about like what even was here in the 19th century.
So there's an interesting history on like the archaeology of the Americas, right? So white European settlers and colonists come here. They're only immediate, at least in North America, their only really immediate sort of frame of reference for Native American cultures are either the stereotypical savage in his teepee, right? That's a predominant view. Or in like the Ohio River Valley, you find like these mounds that they're finding. Oh, there's mounds. And the whole mound builder myth comes out of this. So, but that's not indicative in their minds of like large scale civilization. There's still the sense of like, and sadly, there's a big heap and dose of racism going into this, right? Like, these dark skinned savages couldn't have possibly had advanced civilizations like we have back in Europe in the old country, right? So that's kind of the immediate frame of reference. It's a different story if you're living in Mexico or South America, right? But in North America, where this book comes forth, that's what people are thinking. Actually, Thomas Jefferson, of all people, was super interested in like Native American antiquities, and he actually went on some excavations on some mounds and things like that. But it's a slow burning process until John Lloyd Stevens kind of blows the lid open on all this. He goes down there in the 1830s with Frederick Catherwood. He does these absolutely beautiful artistic renderings of
the
these
Catherwood images are phenomenal.
Yeah, these are great. And it gets published in like 1840 in New York. And
these are the first images of like Mayan pyramids and stuff.
Yes, and the temples and all that stuff. And it's like Harry Potter for Americans in the 1840s. It goes through several editions. It's being sold out, flying off the bookshelves. Joseph Smith gets a copy in 1842 or 1841. John Bernheisel gifts him a copy. Wilford Woodruff brings it to him. And we have a letter from Joseph Smith saying, hey, man, thanks so much. This is great. And it supports the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
I've published an article we can throw in the show notes on like the reception history of Book of Mormon claims in Joseph Smith's lifetime, like polemical arguments along these lines of what are people arguing about? What are apologists saying? And 1842, I call it the watershed of Stevens and Catherwood, because this now we have what appears to be amazing evidence for the Book of Mormon. And yes, it gets this idea of addressing these questions like anachronisms and things like that.
And Matt Roper actually even has a paper in the Interpreter that was published separate from this book a few years earlier, where he actually goes through the Latter-day Saint reaction to Stevens and Catherwood and kind of goes like, okay, why? Why would they have been so excited about it? And documents various things that John Lloyd Stevens is reporting about what he's finding that align with things in the Book of Mormon, right? And so, that really is kind of this watershed moment. An interesting book, not a Latter-day Saint book, but Jungle of Stone. I forget the name of the author, but it's called Jungle of Stone, is just kind of the history and the story of their journey down there and everything. And it's a really fascinating read.
And so that's a watershed moment. And so all of a sudden, I'm sure the Latter-day Saints are really excited about the possibilities. But at the time, there's still a lot that's unconfirmed.
There's still a lot that's unconfirmed. And one more thing about Latter-day Saints being excited about this, that story that Stephen was talking about with David Whitmer, he specifically talks about the discovery of these civilizations in Central America as being like confirmation of, oh, okay, like we were worried about this, but the Lord promised us that the evidence would come, and here it is, right? So he specifically, even David Whitmer saw this as fulfillment of the Lord's promise. that he would vindicate the Book of Mormon. But yes, there's still a lot. As of 1844, 91% of the alleged anachronisms remain unconfirmed. Look like definitely anachronisms, right? But fast forward to today, to Matt Roper's study here, and
This is 1966 through 2025.
To 24. You know, he's doing the research and it gets published in 2025, but you know, you've got to stop the research in order to get it published at some point, right? So the list of alleged anachronisms has gone up. It's up to 226, but
Look at that chart.
the status of those anachronisms, according to current archaeological data, is very different. Basically 77%, 76.99 if you really want to be picky. Basically 77% are now actually verified as being authentic items to pre-Columbian America.
That's insane.
Or the old world.
Or the Old World. We should clarify, some of these anachronisms are alleged for the Old World, but have now been verified in the archaeology of the
switch
Old
back
World.
again to the original 1831, just so I can see the comparison. Okay, so originally 1830. Okay, just red. Like there's very little. confirmed
It's like
about
your
the Book of Mormon.
teacher taking the red pencil to your homework, right?
Yeah.
Like big scary red.
And then fast forward to today, and that is just staggering. That is an insane amount of growth for things that were not confirmed before and now are. I mean, and this is the massive list of green things that now we know through archaeology in some way has been attested.
And I think in addition to the green, it's important to note there's 3 colors on the chart, right? There's this blue section that's 13.72, almost 14% basically. Those are items that aren't confirmed definitively for like the Book of Mormon time, but the data is trending, is how Matt likes to say it. The data is trending towards confirmation. And what he means by that, or to give just a really brief example of something that's kind of trending, is for a long time, metallurgy was thought to not be attested in Central America until 900 AD, several hundred years after Book of Mormon times. Well, over the last few decades, increasingly, research has shown that no, there were actually people in Central America practicing metallurgy earlier and earlier and earlier, and I think now about the date is 600 AD. Still later than Book of Mormon times, but within about 180 years of when Moroni buries the plates. And there's other lines of evidence, things like linguistics and stuff like that suggest that maybe there was knowledge of metallurgy. There's a few little finds, like I think there was like gold dust found at Teotihuacan from like 200 BC or something like that. And so there's like a few little things here and there that suggest, oh, maybe there was metallurgical knowledge earlier than we thought. And so that's trending. It's not confirmed. We're not saying it's not an anachronism, but we're saying, hey, keep an eye on this. Basically,
the horses is another example that Matt Roper brings
Yeah,
up, and I know we're going to do a whole episode about horses, so we won't get into the nitty-gritty details here. But Matt Roper does point out that in Joseph Smith's lifetime, the criticism was not horses during Book of Mormon times; it's horses, period, before the European conquest and colonization, right? So the criticism is no horses existed on the Western Hemisphere, American continent before the Spanish brought them, period. Well, we now know that's not true. We know that there are Pleistocene and Holocene era horse bones and remains. Okay, so now the criticism is, well, okay, there were pre-Columbian horses, but they're too early. So you see how the window is shifting now.
Yeah.
And now it's a question of, can we get the Goldilocks right there in the middle, just right, where it's pre-Columbian, but within Book of Mormon lifetimes. And that's where we see a trending towards confirmation with the most recent excavations by Miller, right?
Right. Wade Miller.
And others. So this is just to say you have to track, and I'm glad Matt did this. You have to track what were the specific criticisms and when are they being made, because you can be imprecise, and we don't want to be imprecise. We need to say in the 1830s and 40s it was this claim. The data has changed. Now it's shifted to this claim. Now the data is shifting it to this claim, right? And so if you're not careful, you're going to be repeating just outdated information that has been refuted even by orders of magnitudes of decades. Just saying there were no horses in ancient America is just not true.
Right.
There were ancient horses. Were they at Book of Mormon times? That's the outstanding question.
We're still trying to, that's indeterminate, but it's trending, right? And it is important to that is an important point to make, because Matt Roper's big list, the 226, that he's documenting claims, the specific claims that critics make. And so in some cases, like one of the things is horse traditions. Okay, some critics said, well, the Native Americans have no traditions of having horses. Well, that's actually that doesn't actually have direct bearing on the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon doesn't say, oh,
independent of whatever tradition.
Yeah,
that's its own thing.
Yeah, that's its own thing. And so even if that weren't confirmed, that doesn't really prove anything for or against the Book of Mormon necessarily, but it is a criticism that was made. And he points out that one actually is false. There are Native American traditions that they had the horse. Now, where those traditions came from, whether they really had the horse or something else, right? That's an open question that actually there have been studies recently trying to kind of figure out where those maybe came from and how those maybe relate to the actual data of and history of the horse in Americas. But the fact is they do have traditions, and so that's a checked off anachronism. Right?
Look, we're playing their game. We're playing the games that the critics set up, which was, we make X claim about the Book of Mormon, it being false and silly for these reasons. Okay, you're setting the rules of the game. So when you see this big, scary red chart, that's because this is what the critics were claiming. And now when it's green, it's proportionate to the amount of actually claims that are responding. Does that make sense? Right.
Yeah.
So some people might say, well, you guys are nitpicking or you're cherry picking or whatever. Well, no, we're trying to be comprehensive because these are the rules of the games that you guys set up by criticizing this book. The other fun example, there's these facetious or unserious claims of anachronisms from the 1830s. The Book of Mormon mentions gunpowder and muskets, and that's totally dumb, and steamboats. Okay, this guy clearly never read the book, right? But hey, that's a claim that some critics were making, right? So kudos to Matt for being comprehensive and following the critics by their own game. So even the little silly things, we still are tracking those. Right,
and so 100%. And the other implication of that particular fact is this is not wedded to a particular geography for the Book of Mormon. And so some people might go through this list and be like, okay, well, yeah, you have this, but it's not in Mesoamerica. Okay, now you're getting to the point where you're critiquing a particular Book of Mormon geography. And that's fair game. I'm not saying that's, but you're not critiquing this particular work on its own terms, right? And Matt acknowledges this in the introduction. This isn't wedded to a particular geography. In fact, conversations I had with Matt, I don't know if he'll do it or he wants someone else to do it, but it would be a very interesting exercise to say, okay, if you set the Book of Mormon in Mesoamerica, how many of these anachronisms are still valid versus are resolved? If you put it in South America, same question. Put it in North America, same question. And that could be a really valuable exercise for the Book of Mormon geography debates. So which one of these geographies better resolves the most anachronisms?
But just off the top of your head, I mean, I imagine that all of those models have their strengths and weaknesses. Well, some have anachronisms that others don't.
if you're talking about the barley, that's a North American. You can check that one off.
Or the big horned rams or whatever. That could potentially sheep or goats. Or
and in fact, a lot of the fauna, the animals, the large quadruped animals that can pass for things like sheep or cows or whatever, their historical range fits a little better if you're putting it in North America, right?
But metallurgy would work better for South America.
Metallurgy is great if you're going to South America. The only one we can't check off there is iron. They don't have a lot of iron working, but copper, gold, silver, metallurgy, well into Book of Mormon times, even Jaredite times, if I'm remembering correctly. But for a lot of the other big things, civilization level things, warfare, that kind of stuff, Mesoamerica is really where
kind of dominates.
Kind of dominates that sort of thing.
His chapter on cultural anachronisms or historical anachronisms, that was really astonishing to me to see. That's where so much of the verification comes now with new data, and it's predominantly coming from Central America. So he lists, fortifications, cities, widespread civilizations, road networks or highway networks, lawyers and judges, these things that in Joseph Smith's day were being criticized for. Stevens and Catherwood kind of pushes the boulder down the hill, and now we're here 200 years later just about, and the archaeological profile is looking a lot better in Mesoamerica for these specific things than perhaps in North America.
And so again, this is something he acknowledges in his introduction, that it's not bound by a particular geography at this point. It's just, and it's on the critic's own terms. So critics will say things like, in pre-Columbian America, like Stephen was talking about, with horses or whatever. And so if the criticism is, this wasn't there in pre-Columbian America, you check it off if it's there in pre-Columbian America. If they're more precise and they say in Book of Mormon times or whatever, right, then okay, now, Book of Mormon times. And so there's more work to be done to flesh out particular details like that. But this is kind of here's the state of the evidence sort of thing.
One thing that has radicalized me was all this Lidar stuff coming to light.
That's been mind-blowing.
So Neil and I, we've quoted these numbers before in some of our published works together, but this was maybe 10 years ago. Now the Lidar stuff from like 5 years ago is like kind of bearing fangs on this. The amount of archaeological work that has been done in the Americas, and specifically Mesoamerica, right? We have cited Mesoamerican experts have put it in the low single digits, right? In terms of like the actual percentage of sites that we've identified, located, excavated, studied the assemblage of what we've discovered, right?
And excavated is like if we've done
a
any
trench,
digging at all, right? Not like did we dig up the whole city, but if we like dug there once at some point in the last 60 years or whatever.
Yeah, so the Lidar is, like I said, putting fangs on this by showing how much more there is undiscovered. And I'm not using this as like a Book of Mormon of the gaps kind of argument, right? But rather just to say, on the blue part, partially confirmed, like, fellas, I'm telling you out there, we have not excavated everything there is to know about ancient America, right? We have not found all the sites. We have not found all the sources. We've not analyzed all the sources and all the data that we have, right? There is still, and I've had conversations with Mesoamerican experts who have told me they expect in our lifetime to find certain confirmation for certain things. Metallurgy is one of them in Mesoamerica, right? Like it seems to be trending that way. So this is just to say, we'll get to this later, right? But taking a deep breath and having some patience for the blue section there, or even the red section.
Even the red section, yeah,
stuff.
absolutely.
Having some epistemic humility for what we know and what we don't know about the ancient world, because our knowledge is getting overturned all the time.
Well, and that's, honestly, that's what this overall trend should tell you, right? Is, in 1830, there were things that people thought were utterly ridiculous about the text that weren't. That are actually pretty good. In fact, I would consider like the highways, what Stephen was talking about. I actually think it's pretty good evidence that we actually have massive highway networks in ancient America in Book of Mormon times, to be specific on that one. And people just thought that was absurd, right? Cement is another fun one. And I mean, we could do a whole episode on cement because that one really drills in like, well, depending on what geography you accept, but it aligns really, really well if you follow a Mesoamerican geography.
You might say it cements the case for the Book of Mormon. Sorry. I'm going to have bad puns any chance I get.
It's really concrete evidence.
Yeah, there you go. There you go, Neil.
But I mean, some of it is really has become, some of these things that have been alleged anachronism at some point have actually become really compelling evidence,
right?
For the Book of Mormon. And so, have patience. Like, yes, there are let's see, a total of 21 unconfirmed on this list now, and there's probably, again, this was the most comprehensive study that's ever been done, but there's probably always someone will want to throw up something else, right? But there's good reason to be patient with some of these things. And
well, and I'm looking at some of these unconfirmed ones here, and I'm just thinking like, okay, so some of these are names, for example.
So for example,
Timothy,
Jonas,
Ether, Kim. So these are names. That's a whole other episode, the Book of Mormon Onomasticon. But these are names that some critics have said we don't have evidence for these names.
Right.
Okay, fine. Yes, in our current state of our epigraphic knowledge of the ancient Americas, we don't have attestation for these names, right? But look, like with Timothy, for example, right, that's Jonas, those are old world names. So are we talking in the new world or the old world? It just takes one inscription and we overturn that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So some of these, like they're getting so granular, right, that I don't know. It seems like you're setting yourself up for defeat because, or metal plates in the New World is one of them, specifically in the New World metal plates, right? Like I know there have been some forgeries trying to make metal plates in the New Worlds, but like, look, it takes one more dig at Teotihuacan or whatever, right, to find a little cache of metal plates and stuff. So you're kind of setting yourself up for failure if you're going to get this granular in demanding attestation for these specific things in the Book of Mormon.
And I mean, we could have a discussion like how many of these things are actually things that we should expect to find. And then there's a whole nother conversation about other ways to address or deal with
Yeah.
anachronisms beyond just being like literally finding the item in the dirt. Things like loan shifting and,
Translation.
the fact that translation can introduce anachronism.
Can we take a few minutes to talk about those?
I mean-
and distinguish how Matt Roper approaches that as opposed to his other
Yeah,
approaches?
I think, we absolutely can. Because Matt, for the most part, is not using those approaches. This is meant to say, okay, what can we confirm is actually historically, archaeologically attested? Now, I did say for the most part, caveat, there are a few instances where Matt is accepting a loan shift as confirming it. But like on some of these, like can we get a peccary or a peccary on the screen?
While you're looking that up, let me explain real quick what loan shifting is for listeners who may not be familiar with it. So another name for loan shifting is semantic expansion or semantic transfer.
Extension,
Whatever.
extension.
Basically, it's when the meaning of a word changes, where it used to refer to one thing, it can now expand to refer to other things that resemble the thing that it originally was meant to describe.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
And resemble is a little bit of a black box because it's not resembles to you or me. It resembles to the culture that has
They're
decided
using the word.
that are
and they've
using the word.
decided- Yes, exactly. So you and I might think that thing doesn't look anything like that other thing. That doesn't matter.
Right,
It's not.
right.
It's in some ways it's a inherently subjective exercise. It's people speaking the language have a word for a thing. They see another thing that does not look similar or familiar to them. They use the familiar word to describe the unfamiliar thing.
My favorite example is hippopotamus. Like the Greeks encountering this massive animal for the first time, and they're like, well, it's got 4 legs and it's in the water,
river?
so it's a river horse.
Yes.
Hippopotamus means river horse.
horse.
And yet hippos look nothing like horses to our
yeah.
own sensibilities.
We do it today all the time, both earnestly and unironically, right? My favorite is on the internet. People refer to raccoons as trash pandas, right? Like, and they're kind of doing it as a joke, but like that's what you're doing.
It's a loan shift.
We do it earnestly. Guinea pigs, right?
Yeah.
Buffalo is another one. We go down the list. The point is that's one potential way, as we're pulling up a picture of a peccary here, to account for anachronisms, is to posit the idea that the Nephites came to the New World, they encountered animals that were unfamiliar to them, and so they gave it a word or a name from an animal that was familiar. Look at that little critter right there, and tell me that does not look like a pig, like a swine.
And not only, don't tell me that it doesn't look like, would you not call that a pig if you saw it?
If you just saw it and say, what is that? It'd be like, oh, some kind of hog.
And in fact, it is called a pig by people all the time.
Routinely. Yes.
I think the in Brazil, what's the Portuguese word for pig? I'm pretty sure in Brazil they call them like porcos or something like that. In fact, the scientific family.
Look at this.
Yeah.
Animal like medium-sized pig-like undulates with a long, flexible snout.
And I'm pretty sure like the scientific order or family that they're in is like it's the hog family, the pig family.
Yeah.
So anyway, Matt puts a few of these like loan shifts in there, but what he does, they're not speculative loan shifts where we're like speculating maybe the Nephites could have called it this. They're loan shifts that are historically attested.
Yes.
Right. And so it's basically, you can't say it's not historical for talking about pigs when we have historical sources from like the Spanish chroniclers
that are
or whatever
doing this.
that are saying, oh, there are these pigs in the New World, right? Or swine in the New World. And so if you have historical sources calling them these things, then he counts that as fulfilled. Now, whether you are willing to
here's
do
the
that,
range. This is great.
Yeah.
There's the range of where these critters are found.
So this one works if you're South American
Mesoamerica
or Mesoamerican.
Yeah.
Maybe even, I guess, part of that gets up into the
A little bit of southeast.
southeastern United States.
Yeah.
Maybe is that Texas actually?
Yeah.
But anyway, and historical ranges are a whole nother conversation
Right.
because they could have had a wider range in the past. But I think that only it's a grand total of like 9 things or something that he does with loan shifting.
It's mostly animals.
So if you're not willing to count those, that doesn't dramatically change the picture here.
Right.
But then you mentioned translation
Yes,
stuff.
we should take a minute to
So
explain
like
that.
how in the Bible, in the King James version of the Bible, it mentions things like candles, but it probably should have been translated as like lamps or lampstands
Right.
because candles are a bit anachronistic for ancient Israel. That is a translation anachronism.
Or
it doesn't
even-
mean that they didn't have lamps in ancient Israel.
Or even steel. The King James Bible sometimes translates the Hebrew Nehushta or Nahash, bronze,
Bronze,
as
copper,
steel.
yeah.
Copper, bronze, they translate as steel. So yes, that's another way that anachronisms can be introduced into a text. And I'm going to read a statement here real quick. These ancient texts written in languages that are not modern English. If you're going to translate that into modern English, by the way, just by virtue of doing a translation, you're making it an anachronistic text.
Yeah.
Because you're having your people speak English.
And
Right.
well, and there are like Bible translation committees and things like
Yeah.
that have said like, yeah,
Okay.
like we try. Oh, you're gonna okay.
I'm going to
go
read
ahead.
this. Yes,
go
because
ahead and read it.
with the Bible, right, this happens routinely where you will have words for things that how are you going to, and should you translate it, quote, literally, which will obscure the intended meaning of it, or do you translate it more idiomatically or paraphrastically in order to conceptually translate what is trying to be said? And there are whole debates among Bible translators how to do this. This gets back to the age-old question, if you are translating the Bible for Eskimos in Alaska and they talk about the sands of Jerusalem, how do you conceptually render that, right?
Or a common one is actually Lamb of God.
Lamb
The
of God,
title
yes.
Lamb of God.
And some of these like
cultures
Inuit,
that don't have lambs.
Inuit cultures, it's like the seal of God or something. Okay, so here is a statement from the committee of the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition that just came out like 2 years ago or something.
NRSV
UE.
UE. It's so long.
It's very long. By the way, the NRSV is not some, crank, weird, apologist, fundamentalist Bible. It is the standard academic ecumenical Bible that scholars and people from all faith traditions can cite and use. It is widely accepted as a standard Bible translation. In academia, academics cite it all the time. Here's what they say. Deciphering the meanings of the Bible's ancient language involves a host of efforts. The study of the languages themselves, the comparative study of cognate languages from the ancient Near East and the Greco-Roman world, the disciplines of philology and linguistics, and the historical study of the social, cultural, and economic contexts in which the Bible was written. The NRSV took special care not to use terms in ways that are historically or theologically anachronistic, though, as in every translation, anachronism is unavoidable.
Dun, dun, dun.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
This
Yes,
is
the
top
Bible's
shelf
fake.
biblical scholars, academic scholars of the Bible saying anachronism is unavoidable in any translation of an ancient text. So our friend Brant Gardner has written on this extensively. He attributes many of the anachronisms in the Book of Mormon to translators' anachronisms that happen routinely, where the translator, by virtue of what he's doing, has to introduce anachronistic language into his translation to make it conceptually grounded for the reader. And so he argues, for example, that horses or steel could be Joseph Smith's anachronism as the translator. Okay,
Right.
So that's another category that we could look at, we could dip into. Matt doesn't really do it so much here in
Right.
his work,
And-
but that is in the realm of we're playing in the ball field with this idea of also translators' anachronisms to perhaps account for some of this.
Yeah, and Matt's clear in the introduction. There may be ways to resolve some of these things that are currently unresolved still. His whole point is we're going to take an inventory, a state of the art with the archaeology, right? And so he's, other than those few exceptions where, like I said, they're kind of historically based anachronisms rather than speculative or historically based loan shifts, excuse me.
Yeah.
Other than those few exceptions, he's saying those aren't really exceptions if you say, what does the historical and archaeological data say about what was here, right?
Of the list of anachronisms that are still unconfirmed, that is a small list. It is increasingly granular. You could say you're setting yourself up for failure by, putting your hat on that increasingly shrinking list. But on the other hand, if I saw a historical document claimed to be written by George Washington, and yet it had an iPhone in it, I would still consider that historically suspect. Isn't the presence of even one anachronism proof that the whole thing is false?
No.
Well, let me actually.
Not necessarily.
Not
Neil,
necessarily.
Please, go ahead.
If it was an anachronism like that, an iPhone, an automobile, something that, if it's something we can definitively say, yes, that's an anachronism, then yeah, it would do it in. But there's nothing like that in the Book of Mormon.
There are no iPhones in the Book of Mormon.
There's
There are
no steam engines.
There's no steam engines and gunpowder and all of that stuff, right? It's all, like a lot of, like with animals, like no one's saying horses didn't exist in 600 BC or whatever. The question is, did they exist in a particular geographic location?
Or with metallurgy. silver and gold, it's an anachronism in the Book of Mormon. No, it's not. Those things are as old as the earth itself. It's the use of those metals that people wonder about.
And so like there's nothing in there that it's like, okay, that definitively did not exist before 400 AD. Like was that accessible to people living in ancient America in whatever geography you want to go by.
Or in ancient Israel.
Or in ancient Israel in the early part of the Book of Mormon. And that's a totally different ballgame than, something that we know definitively did not exist. Other aspects to it, though, I mean, we've kind of covered a lot of these points. The fact that the Book of Mormon is a translation means that really, and I once had someone, I was talking about this on another channel, and someone in the comments comes in and is like, that's not legitimate because, we know, candles in the KJV is an anachronism, but if that was in the original manuscript, we would know it definitely is an anachronism.
We don't have the original manuscript.
Yeah, that's the point. Is we don't have the gold plates. We don't have the Reformed Egyptian. We can't have Egyptian scholars like Stephen here scrutinize the text and say what did that really say. We only have an English translation, and so the presence of an anachronism in an English translation cannot actually be proof that it is not a translation, because as Stephen already just talked about, translation can introduce anachronism. Even the most scrupulous of translations can nonetheless introduce anachronisms. Yeah. I mean, to add to all those reasons why, the whole one anachronism thing just is not, does not actually apply here is, as we talked about, things like loan shifting or semantic extension, these kind of cultural, cross-cultural contacts that could have introduced unusual word usage that might look anachronistic to us. But if we could actually be there and understand, what it meant, what chariot meant to a Nephite or whatever, we would be like, maybe it's not anachronistic after all. I mean, early American archaeologists used the word chariot for items that came out of the ground, but they were little wheeled figurines. They're not, but that's a word usage that is unusual to us, but they're applying it to ancient American artifacts.
Interesting.
Now I don't think that's what chariots in the Book of Mormon are, because that doesn't work with the context.
But it shows the problem that we're identifying here with semantic extension.
Right.
And applying a familiar word to something new, or even just by natural process of how language works, you just broaden the scope of what this word can mean to different items or objects, right?
And the other thing, which brings us back to the very premise, the very purpose of Matt's work, the other thing is just the fact that we haven't dug everything out of the dirt yet, that we see this ongoing trend. If you said in 1830 that one anachronism does it in, and you chose as your one anachronism that there aren't large civilizations, and you're like, that fact alone does the Book of Mormon in, well, Stevens and Catherwood's come along and they're gonna blow your whole argument to bits, right? Yeah. And so again, because we don't, there's not a smoking gun anachronism in the text, we can't ever really know for sure. And look, I get it. If you don't want to, saying we can't know for sure isn't the same as saying that it will be resolved or whatever. But we can't ever really know for sure.
Yeah.
If a given anachronism is just something that hasn't been found yet, or if it's legitimately an anachronism.
Is there anything on that list of unconfirmed things still that you would say are implausible to find?
Well, let me look at the list.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go through.
Yeah. Okay. So. Asses traditions or donkey traditions, that's like what we were talking about with horse traditions.
Horses.
So no Native Americans have traditions of having donkeys. Okay. Well,
okay, so what?
That doesn't do anything for us.
Yeah.
Okay, steel swords in the New World. Okay, that one, and steel swords explicitly in the New World are only mentioned in Ether, which is really early, which you could argue makes it even more problematic, because I mentioned we're getting closer with metallurgy, but not Jaredite times, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that one could be hard. I don't know if we'll ever find steel swords for Jaredite times. What is interesting is we do have tons and tons of iron.
Right.
That goes back to Jaredite times, and we have iron working, not smelting. But iron working going on. Could someone with maybe knowledge of old world metallurgical techniques have come along and made a few steel swords for military captains or something once?
Yeah.
and that could be just a hard item to find in the archaeological record because it was so rare. I mean, they would have known where to find iron. We know that much, right? They would have had access to it.
What about heliocentric astronomy is interesting to me. So that's from our Book of Helaman when we have, I think it's when Mormon is kind of rhapsodizing at the end of the Gadianton robbers, right? Where he says, where we know it is the Earth that moves around the sun or whatever.
Modern audience, you assume he's describing a
heliocentric astronomy, right? So this is like the Copernican revolution that we attribute to these guys in Europe and the early modern Europe. So that one's interesting because those sorts of anachronisms they're both harder to like sort of verify, but they're also harder to like kind of falsify, because you have to basically say at no point in the history of any humans who ever had brains did anybody ever think about heliocentrism until Copernicus, right? Like how could you possibly verify that or falsify that literally nobody before Copernicus and these other smart guys in Europe came around, nobody considered that the Earth was moving around the sun. That seems like a stretch to me, both in terms of like saying this is for sure anachronism and to verify that, right? I suppose we could perhaps find some codex or something. Yeah. I know that the Maya and the Aztec were super into astronomy. They could predict eclipses and things like that. They had a sophisticated calendar. Yeah. Maybe one of them at some point thought, maybe we're moving around the sun, right?
But I assume there's also a possibility that we could learn more about ancient American culture that would maybe give us a clue into maybe Hillman's talking about something else entirely.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that's exactly right.
In fact, there was a paper in BYU Studies a few years ago that argued, I can't remember exactly what the nature of the argument was, but it did argue that he's talking about something else and not really about the
Earth. So that's an interesting one. Same with like, I'll just use one more example, then I'll let Neil pick one. Synagogues in the New World. Right, so they mentioned having synagogues, like the Zoramites have synagogues, for example. That's where they put the Rameumptom,
we
all
usually
that kind of stuff.
Associate that with like a very Jewish place.
Yes, a specifically Jewish, like specifically a place where Jews go to worship today, and it has a certain like aesthetic and an architectural kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like everybody in their brain kind of picture a synagogue and what it looks like for the most part. Okay, if a bunch of Zoramites get together and they call their place a synagogue, or rather Mormon calls it a synagogue, I should be more precise, right? Like then the anachronism isn't that the anachronism is Mormon's usage per se of him describing it. It's just a building where people go to gather to worship, a place of worship.
Well, so that would be an example of like just a semantic extension or a loan shift, right?
I mean, what else would you call a place of worship? You could call it a synagogue, you can call it a church, you can call it a mosque. All of those are going to be like kind of modern conceptions of describing an ancient place of worship.
I mean, the Book of Mormon includes synagogues, churches, and temples.
Yeah.
And those are clearly all like English translations to talk about different kinds of
communal gatherings.
By the way,
gathering
church
spaces.
And synagogue come down to the same idea, a gathering.
Because temple is like slightly different when it comes to the kind of worship you do.
Right. But, should we expect to one day excavate, down in Central America or maybe even Ohio or whatever, like a big building with a Star of David on it or whatever? Like, probably not.
No.
I don't think that's people think synagogues and they're thinking, Mormons expect us to find that they have, what we think of synagogues are. Exactly.
Well,
I don't think that's what we're talking about.
And you have to keep in mind that like what that is something that historically and culturally developed within a particular setting and context. But some of these other ones, like specific Book of Mormon cities being identified, like, again, that's like, you're getting really granular here. No, we haven't found...
Here's Zarahemla.
A city that has like an inscriptional text that confirms its name is Zarahemla. We haven't found... a city with inscriptional texts that confirm its name was Nephi. We actually do. I mean, obviously, there's not universal agreement on particular Book of Mormon geography, but in my opinion, we have some pretty good candidates for some of these cities that have an archaeological history.
And in some cases, we don't know what these cultures
the name
called
itself,
themselves.
Right?
Yeah.
We haven't even discovered the names.
But they have an archaeological history and sequence that is pretty consistent with like the development, the growth, and then destruction of the city in Book of Mormon and things like that. But, that's the kind of thing like maybe like I would be ecstatic if we ever found something like that.
That'd be great. Yeah.
But I don't think it's the end all be all to say we haven't found that, right? Like there are cities in the Bible that we haven't specifically found. There are all kinds of I've talked about the Amarna letters where it talks about Jerusalem, and then archaeologists go dig in Jerusalem, and during the period of Amarna they couldn't find anything. Mm-hmm. And that's actually a common problem with a lot of the cities mentioned in the Amarna letters is they don't have archaeology for those specific cities. Is it a problem that these cities named in the Amarna letters aren't archaeologically attested at the right time? Well, only if you doubt the authenticity of the Amarna letters, which nobody does, right? And so this is a problem real texts can have sometimes, is the cities they identify can't be found archaeologically.
So basically, like, this entire list is, there's no iPhones on this list. There's not a
I
single
don't
thing
think so.
that is like, okay, this never can happen in the archaeological record, or we wouldn't find some other cultural way to conceptualize this. And maybe you'd consider that mental gymnastics, but as we've demonstrated, like, this is actually what real academic historians and biblical scholars do when dealing with ancient texts when they encounter issues like this. Like, they'll consider different cultural ways to kind of make sense of these words and these objects.
I mean, I would say the closest you're coming to an iPhone is either the steel swords or like the silver money, right? Because those are dependent on technological advancements. I guess there's also metal plates. Anything that's dealing with metallurgy, those are potentially like theoretically technological advancements that might be out of time or place. But again, the question is, will future archaeology actually uncover,
Yeah.
silver money or silver metallurgy and iron metallurgy in Book of Mormon times? It could. I mean, that's entirely possible.
This is not the first time this kind of a study has happened, though this certainly is the most recent comprehensive study. Can you tell us about John Clark?
So Matt Roper's own work here actually begins with John Clark in the early 2000s, because he was assisting John Clark on a sort of preliminary version of this. In 2005, I think it was in May 2005, but I might have the month off the top of my head. There was a conference in Washington, D.C. at the Library of Congress, where John Clark, who is a very reputable Mesoamerican archaeologist, by the way, one of the most influential of the late 20th and early 21st century in terms of like pre-classic, early pre-classic Olmec culture and things like that. He did this. He presented a paper at that conference, and he presented preliminarily some results that he and Matt Roper and Wade Ardern, another one of his research assistants, had compiled. And at that point, I'm pretty sure if I'm remembering correctly, they just sampled like 3 publications from the 19th century. And in sampling those 3 publications, they identified 60 criticisms that could be tested archaeologically. And then they said, okay, as of 2004, because he presented in 2005, but they're doing the research earlier, and so as of 2004, how many of these are still anachronisms? What's the status of the evidence? And the charts that he had, and these charts have circulated pretty widely. He had these charts that show these 60 items, and just like with Matt Roper's, as of 1842, when Stevens Catherwood's first reaches them, right, most of the boxes are red. Most of the things are unconfirmed. But as of 2005 or 2004, you see a whole bunch of green, and then he uses yellow for his trending rather than blue. But you see a lot of green and a lot of yellow.
I mean, even that is remarkable.
Yeah.
To just look at.
And at that point they had 35 out of 60 confirmed, so 58% confirmed. It says there, another 17% undetermined, so that's like 75% total, with better evidence than in the 19th century, basically. And so Matt Roper was involved in this, and this is kind of the foundation that he builds on and expands here. And like I said, Matt goes through like over 1,000 publications, and he goes through publications published as recently as the early 2020s. And updates this. And I do find it kind of remarkable that even from 2005, the percentages improve as we get this more comprehensive data set and update it.
From what, 58 to 79%, basically?
58 to 77.
So 20%?
Yeah, basically, 20% improvement on confirmed items. If you combine confirmed and undetermined or trending, you have 75% in John Clark's study, 91% in Matt Roper's study.
Wow.
with better evidence.
I think what's so remarkable about this is like not only to see the progress over time, but the fact that as time passes, the list of criticisms grows, and yet the Book of Mormon outpaces it. And the list of criticism gets more granular and more specific and more nitpicky, and yet the Book of Mormon continues to outpace it. So do church leadership know about this research?
Well, yeah. It's actually kind of funny. Recently sustained, or I guess we didn't really sustain him, recently called first presidency member, D. Todd Christofferson, actually once brought up Matt Roper's research, because this was a long time ago, but Matt's been doing this ongoing for several years. The publication in 2025 is like the culmination of, like I said, like 20 years of research. He started under John Clark. But he mentioned Matt Roper's research in a BYU Idaho devotional. Shout out to the BYU Idaho peeps out there. In 2013, and it's called The Prophet Joseph Smith. Yeah, The Prophet Joseph Smith. And he talks about, it's under the section Be Patient. He talks about how Matt Roper, in a Fair Mormon blog, so shout out to Fair as well, writes about a criticism repeated many times over the years about the mention of steel in the Book of Mormon. In 1884, one critic wrote, Laban's sword was steel, when it was a notorious fact, not just a fact, a notorious fact, that the Israelites knew nothing of steel for hundreds of years afterwards. Who, but as ignorant a person as Rigdon, this person was apparently subscribing to the Spalding-Rigdon theory. Ignorant a person as Rigdon would have perpetuated all these blunders. More recently, Thomas O'Day in 1957 stated, every commenter on the Book of Mormon has pointed out that many cultural and historical anachronisms, such as the steel sword of Laban in 600 BC. And so Elder Christofferson at the time, not President Christofferson yet, said, we had no answer to these criticisms at the time, but as often happens in these matters, and the charts we talked about shows you just how often it happens, new discoveries in later years shed new light. Roper reports, it is increasingly apparent that the practice of hardening iron through deliberate carburization, quenching, and tempering was well known to the ancient world from which Nephite came. It seems evident, notes one recent authority, that by the beginning of the 10th century BC, blacksmiths were intentionally stealing iron. And I'm going to stop right there and mention a study I read. It was like a 2015 study where they actually sampled 60 items from the early Iron Age, and 57 of them turned out to be steel. They had been carburized into steel. 57 out of 60. But it gets masked because archaeologists will often just say, we found an iron object. And they won't bother to get it tested to see had it carburized into steel. So most iron objects actually are probably carburized into steel. You don't get that explained. But in 1987, the Ensign reported, and it was also reported in many august archaeological venues as well. It wasn't just, but for church members, the Ensign is a familiar reference point, reported that archaeologists had unearthed a long steel sword near Jericho, dated to the late 7th century BC, probably to the reign of King Josiah, who died shortly before Lehi began to prophesy. This sword is now on display in the Jerusalem's Israel Museum. The museum's explanatory sign reads in part, this sword is made of iron hardened into steel, attesting to substantial metallurgical know-how. Elder Christofferson now, where answers are incomplete or lacking altogether, patient study and patient waiting for new information and discoveries to unfold will often be rewarded with understanding. And so, yeah, church leaders have noted this and have basically counseled, be patient with the data. Answers may come in time. And that's a gospel principle, really, right? That
the Lord's timing.
We have questions, and we study our scriptures, and we study and we seek answers, but we have to be patient, and sometimes it takes time before answers come. And that's true in academia, in the study of the ancient world as well. I do actually want to share a quote from John Clark as well, from his earlier study, because I think it's relevant to a lot of what we've talked about, the idea of one anachronism doing things in and stuff like that. This is what a professional archaeologist actually thinks about that kind of problem. He says, many items mentioned in the Book of Mormon have not been and may never be verified through archaeology, but many have been. Verification is a one-way street in this instance. Positive and negative evidence do not count the same, as anyone tested for serious medical conditions know. Given current means of verification, positive items are here to stay, but negative items may prove to be positive ones in hiding. This is the same point Elder Christofferson's making, right? Missing evidence focuses further research, but lacks compelling logical force in arguments because it represents the absence of information rather than secure evidence.
There's an old saw about this, right? The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Right.
It's said so often it's a cliche at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's so exciting how the Book of Mormon is clearly getting better with age. And for those who want to learn more, you can read this volume, number 65, at the Interpreter Foundation online for free, or you can buy the print copy of this, and it's entitled Anachronisms, Accidental Evidence in Book of Mormon Criticisms. Remember that you can believe boldly and still study hard, and we'll see you next time.